For 11 years, a woman I'd never spoken to deposited $800 into my bank account every single month. I never knew her name. I never knew why. And then one morning, a lawyer called and told me she was gone and that she had left me everything. Good morning, dear listeners. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Vivian, and I want to tell you about the strangest, most life-altering thing that has ever happened to me. Before I do, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what city you're listening from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario, which is a city that doesn't get mentioned much unless someone's talking about nickel mining or the fact that NASA once used the landscape to train astronauts because it looks so much like the moon. I'm not sure how I feel about that as a selling point for my hometown. But there it is. My mother, Gwen, worked as a school secretary for 22 years. My father left when I was 7 and sent birthday cards for a few years after that, then stopped. We didn't discuss it much. My mother was not a woman who spent a lot of energy on things she couldn't change. By the time I was 36, I had built a life that was honest and ordinary and mine. I worked as a payroll administrator for a mid-sized construction company in Barrie, Ontario, where I'd moved after finishing my accounting diploma at Georgian College. I rented a 2-bedroom townhouse on Eccles Street. I used the second bedroom as a home office and told myself I'd eventually use it for something more interesting, but I never did. I drove a 2011 Subaru Forester with a crack across the bottom corner of the windshield that I kept meaning to get fixed. I had a tabby cat named Fig. I went to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. I called my mother every Sunday at 7. It was a good life, not a dramatic one, but good. The first transfer came in February of 2013. I noticed it on a Wednesday evening when I was reconciling my personal accounts, which I did every week, because working in payroll makes you meticulous about money whether you want to be or not. There it was, $800, deposited that morning. The description field said only e-transfer, personal, no name, no message. I called my bank. The customer service representative confirmed it was a legitimate transfer from a private account, but said they couldn't disclose information about the sender without a formal request process. I filed one. 2 weeks later, I received a letter explaining that the account was held under a trust registered in British Columbia and that the transfer had been authorized intentionally. There was no error. The sender had chosen to send it. I waited for it to stop. It didn't stop. March, then April, then May. By July, I had filed a second inquiry and spoken to 3 different people at the bank, each of whom told me some version of the same thing. The transfers were legitimate, intentional, and private. The trust was structured in a way that shielded the sender's identity completely. By the end of the first year, I had $9,600 sitting in a separate savings account that I wouldn't touch. Spending it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like accepting a gift from someone whose face you couldn't see. What if they wanted it back? What if this was a mistake that would eventually need to be unwound? I kept it separate. I kept waiting. By the 5th year, I had stopped waiting. The money accumulated in that account the way sediment does at the bottom of a river, quietly, without ceremony, in a way you don't notice until it's suddenly substantial. By February 2024, when everything changed, there was $105,600 in that account. 11 years of $800 deposits every single month, without fail, without explanation. The call came on a Tuesday. I was at my desk at work, reviewing a payroll discrepancy for one of the site foremen, when my cell phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, a Vancouver area code. I let it go to voicemail and listened during my lunch break, standing in the parking lot in February with my coat half zipped because I'd rushed out without doing it up properly. Ms. Ashworth, my name is Leonard Briggs. I'm a solicitor with Briggs and Nakamura in Vancouver. I'm calling regarding the estate of Miss Dorothy Fenn, who passed away on January 19th of this year. Mrs. Fenn has named you as a beneficiary in her will. Please call me at your earliest convenience. I stood in the parking lot for a long time after that. Dorothy Fenn. I turned the name over slowly, the way you turn over a stone looking for something underneath it. Nothing. The name meant nothing to me at all. I called Leonard Briggs back from my car. He answered on the second ring. He had a measured, careful voice, the voice of someone who delivers complicated news regularly and has learned not to rush it. He confirmed what the voicemail had said. Dorothy Fenn, aged 79, had passed away in Vancouver on January 19th following a brief illness. She had updated her will 14 months before her death. In it, she had named me, Janet Ashworth of Barrie, Ontario, as the primary beneficiary of her estate. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "After taxes and legal fees," Leonard said, "you stand to inherit approximately $1.3 million in registered and non-registered investments. A property in East Vancouver valued at approximately $890,000 and the remaining contents of a private trust. The total value, Ms. Ashworth, is in the range of $2.4 million. I looked at the crack in my windshield. I had been meaning to fix that for 2 years. "Mr. Briggs," I said, "I don't know who Dorothy Fenn is." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I know." "She anticipated that you would say that. There's a letter. She asked that you read it privately. He told me he would courier the documents to me within the week." I thanked him, ended the call, and sat in my car for 20 minutes before I went back inside and finished reviewing the payroll discrepancy. That evening I called my mother. She picked up on the first ring, which was unusual. She normally let it ring twice, a habit she'd developed from years of being the last one to the phone at the school office. "Mom," I said, "do you know someone named Dorothy Fenn?" The silence that followed was not a confused silence. It was the specific, weighted silence of someone who has been half expecting a question for a long time and is now deciding how to answer it. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked. I told her about the call. I told her about the estate. I heard her exhale slowly, the way she did when she was steadying herself. "She was your grandmother's oldest friend," my mother said finally. "They grew up together in Port Alberni on Vancouver Island. When your grandmother moved east, Dorothy stayed. They wrote letters for years, actual paper letters. Your grandmother kept them in a hat box on the top shelf of her closet. My grandmother, Evelyn Ashworth, had died when I was 4. I had almost no memory of her, just an impression of a particular perfume, something floral, and a kitchen that was always warm." "Dorothy came to the funeral," my mother said. "She flew all the way from Vancouver. I remember her because she was the only person there who wasn't from Sudbury. She came up to me at the reception and she held my hands, both of them, like this, and she said, 'Gwen, I want you to know that Janet won't be forgotten.' I thought she meant she'd stay in touch. Send a card at Christmas." I didn't think she meant. She stopped. "She meant this," I said. "Yes," my mother said quietly. "I think she did." The documents arrived by courier on Friday afternoon. I signed for the package, brought it inside, and set it on the kitchen table without opening it for an hour. Fig sat across from me and watched me with the particular blank patience of cats. When I finally opened it, there were the legal documents, and there was the letter. It was sealed as Leonard had said it would be, with my name written on the front in careful cursive. I took it to the couch. Dorothy Fenn's handwriting was clear and deliberate, the handwriting of a woman who had learned penmanship before it stopped being taught. "Janet," she wrote, "you won't know me. That's by design, and I want to explain it as best I can. Your grandmother Evelyn was the finest friend I ever had. We met when we were 9 years old, climbing the same apple tree in the lot behind the church on Argyle Street, and we were barely apart until she moved east at 24 to marry your grandfather. I missed her every day of my life after that. In the particular way, you miss someone who knew you before you became whoever you eventually became. When Evelyn died, I made a private promise to myself that I would look after her family the way she would have if she'd had the chance. Your mother was managing. She's a strong woman, your mother. But I watched from a distance the way you can now through the small windows people leave open on the internet, and I could see that you were the one who needed the quietest kind of help. Not emergency help, just a floor. I never contacted you because I didn't want to create obligation. I didn't want you looking over your shoulder or feeling watched. I wanted you to live your life freely, and I wanted to do this because it was right, not because I expected anything in return. Your grandmother would have done the same. She was that kind of person. I hope these years gave you something. I hope the years ahead give you more. With love, Dorothy, I sat on that couch until it was dark outside, and Fig climbed into my lap, and I let him stay there. What do you do with something like that? With 11 years of quiet care from a woman you'd never met, who had made a promise to a dead friend and kept it without ever asking to be seen. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or stricken, or somehow cheated. Cheated of the chance to say thank you to someone who was now gone. I felt all of it, cycling through without order for several days, until the calls began. Dorothy had 2 children. Her son, Nathan Fenn, was 53, a commercial real estate developer based in Calgary. Her daughter, Suzanne Fenn Gilroy, was 49 and lived in Kelowna with her husband, where she ran a small event planning company. The will, Leonard explained when I called him the following week, had been amended 14 months before Dorothy's death. In the original version, Nathan and Suzanne were split equally. In the amended version, each had received a specific bequest, $150,000 each, and I had been named primary beneficiary of the remainder. Leonard said this carefully, in the way of a man who had delivered this information before and understood what it meant. "They've already been in contact with my office," he told me. "I would strongly recommend that you retain your own legal counsel, Miss Ashworth, someone who represents your interests specifically." Nathan called me 4 days later. The number showed up as a Calgary cell. His voice was professionally warm, the warmth of someone who negotiates for a living and knows that warmth is a tool. He said he was sorry for the loss of his mother. He said he appreciated what his mother had felt for my family. He said he thought there was room for what he called a practical conversation about the estate and how to move forward in a way that worked for everyone. He said practical conversation twice in 4 minutes. I told him I needed time to process and would be in touch. I hung up and immediately searched for an estate litigation lawyer in Barrie. I found Deborah Tran through the Law Society of Ontario's referral service. Her office was downtown on the 2nd floor of a converted heritage building on Dunlop Street. She was in her early 50s with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of considered stillness that comes not from being slow, but from having learned that speaking too quickly is a waste of precision. She read the will, the letter, and my summary of Nathan's call without interrupting. Then she looked up. "Have you agreed to anything?" she asked. "No, good. Let's keep it that way." She explained what we were looking at. Nathan and Suzanne's challenge would most likely rest on two arguments: that Dorothy had lacked testamentary capacity when she amended her will, given her age and the illness that preceded her death, and that the amendment had been made under undue influence. She paused when she said that last part. "They'll suggest the influence came from you," she said. "I never once spoke to her," I said. "I didn't even know her name until 2 weeks ago." "I know," Deborah said. "That's going to be one of our most important facts." We spent the rest of that meeting mapping out what we needed: medical records from the period surrounding the will amendment, documentation of the 11 years of monthly transfers, evidence of a consistent, deliberate pattern of behavior that predated any contact with me, and if it existed, any correspondence in which Dorothy had explained her intentions in her own words. I left Deborah's office with a retainer agreement and a list. Driving home through the February slush on Dunlop Street, I felt, for the first time since Leonard Briggs's call, like I had something solid to stand on. I called my mother that evening and told her about the letters in the hat box. She found them that same weekend. There were 43 of them, spanning from 1987 to 2009, when my grandmother died. Dorothy's letters to Evelyn kept all those years. My mother drove them down from Sudbury herself, a 4-hour drive in winter, because she didn't want to risk them in the mail. We sat at my kitchen table with tea and read through them together, carefully, the way you handle something irreplaceable. The later letters were the ones that mattered most for our purposes. In 3 separate letters from the early 2000s, Dorothy mentioned me by name. In one, she wrote that she had started the monthly transfers and intended to continue them for as long as she was able. In another, she wrote that she had spoken to her solicitor about updating her will and her reasons for doing so. In the last one, dated 2008, she wrote, "I have made my decision about the estate, and I am at peace with it. Evelyn's Janet will be looked after." I photographed all 43 letters and sent them to Deborah that night. Deborah's investigator, a methodical woman named Priscilla Oduya, who specialized in estate litigation support, had meanwhile been working through Dorothy's medical records. What she found within 2 weeks was not what Nathan and Suzanne's legal team was counting on. Dorothy had been seen by her family physician and a geriatrician in the 18 months before her death. The records showed age-related changes consistent with a 78-year-old woman, but no dementia diagnosis, no documented cognitive impairment, no noted lapses in executive judgment. In fact, in the year she had amended her will, she had renewed a residential lease on one of her investment properties, corresponded extensively with her accountant about her registered accounts, and made several substantial charitable donations that required coordinated legal and financial planning. Deborah called me on a Thursday morning. "Their capacity argument is going to struggle," she said. "The records don't support it." "What's next?" I asked. "Next," she said, "is that Nathan Fenn's lawyer filed a motion yesterday requesting a 60-day adjournment of the probate proceedings." "They're stalling," I said. "Yes, they're calculating that this becomes expensive enough for you that you settle. You're paying your lawyer out of savings. They have liquid assets, and they're betting you run out of time or money before they do." "Can we oppose?" "Already filed," Deborah said. "And something else. Priscilla found a statutory declaration Dorothy had signed 14 months ago. The same month she amended the will, in the presence of her solicitor and a witness. In it, she described her relationship with my grandmother, the history of the transfers, and her reasons for the amendment. She listed them sequentially, with dates, with context. It's 4 pages. It's signed, witnessed, and notarized. I sat down at my kitchen table. "Is that our case?" I asked. "A significant part of it," Deborah said. "Yes." I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a long time, looking at the letters spread across my table. 43 letters. A woman in Vancouver writing to her best friend in Ontario for 20 years, talking about me. A child, then a teenager, then an adult, as though keeping watch on me from a distance was simply a thing she had decided to do, and that was that. I thought about Nathan's voice. Practical conversation, I thought. No, not practical, not a conversation, the whole thing. Nathan made his next move on a Thursday. I came home from work to find a note tucked under my door, a printed card from a Calgary address. It said, simply, "I'll be in Barrie on Saturday. I think we should meet. Nathan Fenn." I had not given him my address. I photographed the card and sent it to Deborah immediately. Her response came within the hour. She told me to document everything, to not open the door if he came, and that this constituted contact that could support a harassment complaint if it continued. She was already filing a formal notice with his legal team. He came Saturday morning. I heard the knock and looked through the peephole, and there he was, a tall man in a good coat, standing on my steps with the specific composed expression of a man who believes his composure is a form of authority. I opened the door to the width of the chain. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "I was passing through," he said, which was not possible. Nobody passes through Barrie on the way to somewhere more important in February. "We have lawyers for a reason," I said. "Please contact Deborah Tran's office." He pressed one hand flat against the doorframe. "I just want to talk, Janet, without the lawyers in the way. Look, I know my mother had feelings about your family. I respect that. But what she did to Suzanne and me, what she did, as I said, was legal, documented, and her choice to make. She was ill. Her neurologist's records suggest otherwise," I said. He looked at me through the gap in the door. Something shifted in his face. The composed expression thinned. "You've got $105,000 that belongs to this estate," he said quietly. "Our lawyers are going to argue it should have been considered part of the estate assets before the probate valuation. We're prepared to pursue that separately." I looked at him for a moment. Then I closed the door and put the chain back on and called Deborah from the hallway. "It's a pressure tactic," she said when I told her. "The transfers were gifts under the Income Tax Act. They don't attach to the estate. He's trying to make you afraid." "It's working," I said. "That's fine," she said. "Let it work a little. Just don't let it move you." What moved me instead, that same evening, was a text from my colleague, Roseanne Leclerc. Roseanne had worked at the company for 9 years before I got there and had a particular talent for noticing things without being asked. She'd seen me eating lunch at my desk for 3 weeks straight. She'd seen me step outside to take calls and come back quieter than I'd left. That Friday, she'd appeared beside my desk at 4:45 with her coat already on and her car keys in hand and said, "You're coming for dinner. Don't argue." So I'd told her, not the numbers, not the legal details, just the shape of it. A woman I'd never met had quietly supported me for 11 years and left me her estate. Her children were contesting it. I was in the middle of something I hadn't asked for and wasn't certain I'd survive financially. Roseanne had listened to all of it over pasta and a glass of wine and then said, "You're not going to let them bully you out of this. It wasn't a question." "No," I said. "Good," she said. "So what do you need?" That question, "What do you need?" undid something in me. I had been treating the whole situation as a logistics problem to solve alone, the way I solved payroll discrepancies, methodically, without involving anyone who didn't absolutely need to know. The idea that I could need something and say so hadn't fully occurred to me. I need someone who isn't afraid, I said. Roseanne pointed her fork at me. That's me. I'm not afraid. Update me when things happen. She became the person I texted in the weeks that followed, not to process, not to spiral, just to have a witness. When Nathan's adjournment motion was denied, I texted her. When Deborah filed our primary evidence, I texted her. Her replies were always short and exactly right. Good, stay put. Don't blink. She gave me a small silver pin shaped like a compass rose, the kind of thing you'd clip to a bag or a lapel. So you know which direction you're going, she said. I wore it to every meeting with Deborah after that. My mother helped in her own way. She had found in that same hat box 3 cards that Dorothy had sent not to my grandmother but directly to her. To Gwen Ashworth, in the years after Evelyn's death. They were short notes, just a few lines each. In all 3, Dorothy mentioned me. In one, she wrote that she was keeping the promise. In another, she wrote, I think about Janet often. I hope she knows she has more people in her corner than she realizes. Deborah added the cards to our evidence file. Priscilla, meanwhile, had located 2 people willing to speak to Dorothy's character and mental clarity. Her accountant of 20 years, a man named Jeffrey Carlisle, who provided a written statement describing Dorothy as sharp, thorough, and fully in command of her financial affairs until the final weeks of her life. And her neighbor of 12 years, a retired school principal named Margaret Dougal, who told Priscilla that Dorothy had beaten her at Scrabble the week before she went into hospital and had challenged the score on 2 plays with complete accuracy. I called Deborah on a Tuesday evening to go over where we stood. Where are they? I asked. Nathan and Suzanne. What are they doing? Watching, Deborah said. Their last filing was 11 days ago. No new motions. Good, I said. Maybe, Deborah said. Or they're building something. 2 weeks later, we found out what they were building. A letter arrived through Nathan's legal team containing a settlement offer in exchange for my withdrawal from all estate proceedings and a full release of claims. I would receive a lump sum of $300,000. The letter framed this as a gesture of goodwill and practical resolution for all parties. I read it twice. Then I called Deborah. No, I said before she'd finished summarizing it. Deborah paused. Janet, $300,000 is no. She was quiet for a moment. Then, all right, I'll communicate the rejection. I hung up and went back to the payroll reports at my desk. I had a benefits reconciliation due by Thursday. I worked on it. My life didn't stop being my life during any of this. The farmer's market on Saturday, the Sunday call to my mother, Fig asleep on the radiator. The case existed alongside all of it in a separate channel, enormous and real. But I refused to let it collapse into everything else. The ordinary days were part of what I was fighting for, not just the money, a life. My life. They came together, a Saturday morning in April. I was at home, which Nathan must have known because he'd been to my door before and had clearly tracked my habits. The knock came at 10:15. I looked through the peephole and saw them both. Nathan Fenn was in the same good coat. Suzanne Fenn Gilroy stood beside him, holding a paper bag from a bakery on the north end of Barrie that I recognized by the logo. She had brought pastries. The gesture was so calculated and so human at the same time that for a second it almost worked on me. I opened the door, not the chain this time, all the way, because it was two of them and standing behind a chain felt like fear made visible. "We owe you an apology," Suzanne said. She had her mother's coloring, the same dark eyes, and she looked genuinely exhausted in a way that no amount of careful presentation could hide. "We've handled this badly. We know that. I'm sorry for the loss of your mother," I said. "I meant it. Thank you." She glanced at Nathan, who nodded slightly. "We just want to talk. without the legal machinery. You can say what you need to say here, I said. Nathan stepped forward slightly. That was enough. I know what a step forward is when it's a tactic. We've reviewed our position, he said. We're prepared to increase our offer substantially. $500,000, Janet. That's more than double what we proposed in the letter. You could buy a house. You could pay off your car, take care of your mother, and walk away from all of this today. I looked at him. I already said no to $300,000, I said. The answer to $500,000 is the same. Something dropped in his expression. The professional warmth simply left, the way a screen goes dark when the power cuts. You're a payroll administrator, he said. His voice was lower now. You've been paying your lawyer for 4 months out of your own savings. We can do this for 2 years. 3. Our resources don't have a problem sustaining that. Do yours? Is that a threat, Nathan? It's arithmetic, he said. Suzanne put her hand on his arm. He didn't step back, but he didn't step further forward either. She turned to me, and when she spoke, her voice had something real in it underneath the exhaustion. Janet, I flew to Vancouver 9 times in my mother's last 2 years. 9 times. I sat with her through her treatments. I drove her to appointments. Nathan flew out 6 times. We were there. We were present. You never met her. You don't know what those years were like, what it cost us to watch her get smaller. And now, she stopped, pressed her lips together. And now a stranger has her house, she said quietly. I understood exactly what she was saying. And some part of me, the quiet, unglamorous part that has never been comfortable with things that aren't fair, flinched. But Dorothy had known all of that. She had known her children visited. She had known I'd never met her. She had documented her decision and her reasons in her own handwriting, in the presence of her lawyer and a witness 14 months before she died. She had not been confused. She had not been pressured. She had looked at all of those facts and made her choice anyway. I understand why you're angry, I said. If I were you, I would be too, but your mother made her decision clearly and deliberately. I'm not going to dishonor that because it's uncomfortable. Uncomfortable, Suzanne said. I think you're in pain, I said. I think the pain is real. I think it still doesn't change anything. Nathan looked at me for a long moment. It was the kind of moment where the real question being decided isn't the legal one. You're going to regret this, he said quietly. Goodbye, I said. I closed the door, stood in my front hallway with my back against it, listened to their footsteps on the porch steps, the sound of a car door, the engine, then nothing. My hands were shaking. But it was different from the shaking after Nathan's first visit. That had been adrenaline and fear. This was something else. The vibration that happens in your arms after you've held a heavy door shut for a long time and finally been able to let go. Were they right about resources? Yes. They had more money than I did. This could drag on. There was no guarantee. A judge might see it differently than Deborah expected. I might spend another year fighting and walk away with nothing but legal bills and a very unhappy cat. I knew all of that. I had known it since Deborah first laid out the landscape. But fear doesn't have to be the loudest thing in the room. I had learned that over these months. It can sit in the corner and make itself known, and you can acknowledge it and then go back to work. You don't have to hand it the wheel, I texted Roseanne. They came, both of them. I said no. She replied in 90 seconds. Of course you did. Sunday brunch? Yes, I wrote back. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea and stood at the window for a while watching the street where Nathan's rental car had been. Then I went to work on my taxes, which were due in 3 weeks and not going to file themselves. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in September. I drove to Toronto the evening before and stayed at a hotel near the courthouse. I ordered room service, went through the documents with Deborah until 9 o'clock, and went to bed at 10. I slept 6 hours, better than I'd expected. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined and considerably less dramatic. Wood paneling, institutional lighting, the particular quality of quiet that comes from a place where serious decisions happen too regularly to be treated as exceptional. The judge, Honorable Renata Osei, was in her late 50s, precise and unhurried, the kind of judge who has read everything in front of her before she enters and has no patience for theater. Nathan and Suzanne sat at the opposing table with 2 lawyers. Nathan was in a dark suit. Suzanne had dark circles under her eyes, less concealed than they'd been at my door. Looking at her, I felt again that complicated pull, not sympathy, exactly, but recognition. She looked like a person who had expected a different story and was exhausted by the one she'd ended up in instead. The morning was procedural. Both sides presented documented evidence. Deborah formally entered Dorothy's statutory declaration into the record. The opposing counsel objected on evidentiary grounds. Judge Osei overruled, noting that the declaration had been witnessed, notarized, and predated the testator's death by 14 months with no suggestion of duress. I watched Nathan's jaw tighten very slightly. The medical records came next. Deborah had retained an independent geriatric psychiatrist, Dr. Amara Diallo, to review Dorothy's records and provide a written expert opinion. Dr. Diallo's conclusion: Mrs. Fenn demonstrated no clinical evidence of cognitive impairment beyond typical age-related changes. Her documented financial and legal decision-making in the 14 months prior to her death reflects preserved executive function and capacity for complex judgment. The opposing side's expert, a Dr. Hewson, testified that certain lapses in short-term memory documented in Dorothy's records could have impaired her judgment in ways not always visible in clinical assessments. Deborah cross-examined him without visible emotion. Doctor, in your expert opinion, did Dorothy Fenn lack testamentary capacity? She may have experienced periods of, that wasn't my question. Did she lack testamentary capacity? Yes or no? A pause. I cannot state with certainty that she lacked capacity. Thank you, Deborah said. Nothing further. Then Nathan took the stand. He was good. I'll give him that. He spoke about his mother with warmth that I believed was genuine. The summers in Kelowna, the dinners, the business advice she'd given him early in his career. He said he'd noticed her becoming more withdrawn in her final years, more susceptible to sentiment over sense. He said that when she'd mentioned updating her will, he'd assumed it was a small adjustment. He said, with the precisely calibrated pause of a man who knows how pauses work. I never imagined she would leave everything to a stranger. That's not the woman I raised. That's not the mother I knew. Deborah rose. Mr. Fenn, you mentioned your mother became more withdrawn in her final years. Can you describe a specific social commitment she declined during that period? He hesitated. She stopped going to her investment group. When was that? A pause. Around 2022, I believe. Deborah placed a document on the table. This is a record of attendance from the East Vancouver Investors Roundtable, showing your mother present at 14 of 16 sessions in 2022, and all 8 sessions in the first half of 2023, the year she amended her will. Is it possible you're mistaken about the timeline? I may have the dates wrong. Is it possible you have other details wrong as well? Objection from opposing counsel. Sustained. But the room had already felt the moment. You testified you had no knowledge of any ongoing financial support your mother provided to Ms. Ashworth. Is that correct? That's correct. Were you aware that your mother made 132 consecutive monthly transfers to Miss Ashworth's account over 11 years? I was not aware of the extent of it, no. At any point in those 11 years, did your mother discuss the specifics of her estate plans with you? We discussed. Nathan stopped. She said she intended to take care of us. She did take care of you. She left you each $150,000. Did she ever explicitly tell you that you would be her primary heirs? A longer pause. She implied it. She implied it, not stated it. Yes. Deborah turned a page. I have here the statutory declaration your mother signed 14 months before her death. In it, she writes, and here Deborah read the line I had already learned by heart. I have given considerable thought to my estate over many years. My decision is not impulsive, not sentimental, and not uninformed. It is deliberate. It is mine. The courtroom was quiet. Mr. Fenn, does that read to you like a woman who didn't know what she was doing? Nathan looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the table. Nothing further, Deborah said. Suzanne was called next. She was quieter than her brother, more careful. But near the end, when Deborah asked whether Dorothy had ever explained directly why she'd made the decision she had, something in Suzanne gave way. She looked at Deborah, and then, unexpectedly, the way things happened that matter, she looked at me. It was the first time she'd looked directly at me since the day they'd come to my door. She looked tired. She looked like a woman at the end of a story she hadn't written. No, she said. She didn't explain. Deborah let it sit for a moment. Then she sat down. Judge Osei thanked both parties and indicated she would review the evidence and issue her ruling within 10 business days. I walked out of the courthouse into the September afternoon and sat on the steps and called my mother. It went well, I said. I think it went well. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Dorothy would be so glad. I pressed my hand flat against the stone steps beside me. Cool and solid. I know, I said. The ruling came on a Thursday 9 business days later. Deborah called at 7 in the morning, which told me she'd already read it and needed a moment before she dialed. Janet, she said, we won. I put down my coffee. Judge Renata Osei had upheld the will in full. The estate found no credible evidence that Dorothy Fenn had lacked testamentary capacity. Her medical records, her statutory declaration, her documented financial activity, and the 43 letters spanning 22 years demonstrated consistent, unimpaired judgment and a long-standing rational intention. The court further found that the claim of undue influence was entirely unsupported. The deceased and the beneficiary had never communicated. There was no mechanism by which influence could have occurred. Deborah filed the confirmation with the probate court by noon. Nathan's lawyer filed a notice of intent to appeal within a week. I called Deborah the morning I heard. Can they win? They can file, she said. An appeal requires demonstrating legal error. Disagreement with the outcome isn't grounds. She was unhurried the way she always was. They have no grounds, Janet. She was right. The Court of Appeal dismissed the challenge 48 days later. The damage to Nathan and Suzanne by then had accumulated in the particular quiet way that things accumulate when you've made a long, expensive, public miscalculation. The legal fees from the proceedings had been substantial. Nathan had financed part of his share against assets in his development company, which drew attention in Calgary real estate circles. An item appeared in a legal affairs newsletter, brief, factual, the kind of thing that gets forwarded by people who remember it. Suzanne had spoken to a journalist at one point during the proceedings, attempting to frame the story in her favor, and the resulting article had been less favorable than she'd hoped. Jeffrey Carlisle, Dorothy's accountant, called me the week after the appeal dismissal. He'd been following the case and wanted to express that Dorothy would have been glad of the outcome. He told me she had spoken of me, not often, but with something he described as settled certainty, like a thing she had long since made her peace with. Settled certainty. I wrote those words on a sticky note and put it on my bathroom mirror, where it stayed for months. "I called Roseanne, we won," I said. She laughed, short and warm. "I know. I could tell from your text the last 2 weeks. You stopped sounding like you were bracing for something." "I called my mother." She cried. "I cried. The real kind, eventually. The kind that arrives late and arrives all at once. The kind that isn't just about the immediate thing but about 11 years of $800 deposits she hadn't known about, and 43 letters in a hat box, and a woman on a plane from Vancouver to Sudbury for a funeral in a city she'd never been to, holding a grieving woman's hands in both of hers and meaning every word of a promise she made. She kept it, I told my mother. She kept it, my mother said. I did not rush anything after that. The first thing I did, the very first, was call the property manager for my mother's building in Sudbury and ask about larger units. She'd been in a one-bedroom since her knee surgery 4 years ago, and the kitchen was too small for someone who cooked the way she did. We found a 2-bedroom with a south-facing balcony on the 3rd floor. She cried again when I took her to see it. The good kind. I sold my townhouse on Eccles Street and bought a small house in the east end of Barrie, close enough to the waterfront to walk to in good weather. The windshield crack got fixed, so did a number of other things I'd been carrying on the list of things I couldn't yet afford. I established a bursary fund through Georgian College, the college I'd attended on a shoestring, working nights at a gas station to make rent, for students in financial need studying business administration or accounting. I called it the Dorothy and Evelyn Bursary because both names belonged on it and because the story didn't exist without both of them. I kept my job. I like my work. I'm good at it. The payroll doesn't reconcile itself. On a Thursday evening in November, I taught myself to play cribbage from a book I found at a used bookstore on Dunlop Street. I'm not good at it. I intend to get better. The photograph of my grandmother and Dorothy that my mother found in the hat box, the two of them, maybe 19 or 20, standing in front of a lake somewhere with their arms around each other and real unguarded smiles, sits now on my windowsill in the new house, in a small frame next to where I keep my coffee cup in the morning. Some mornings I talk to it. I don't think that's strange. I think some things deserve to be acknowledged out loud, even when the people involved are no longer there to hear you. I hope you can hear me, I tell them. Both of you. I think they can.